The Perfect Neighbor. A Jessie Hunt psychological suspense thriller. Book 9. The Perfect Disguise. A Jessie Hunt psychological suspense thriller. Book 10. Written by Blake Pierce. Narrated by Ulka S. Mohanty. Chapter 1. She didn't want to be nosy. At least that's what Priscilla Barton told herself, as she walked along the Manhattan Beach Strand with a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc in her hand. Technically, Prissy, as she preferred to be called, was welcoming a new neighbor to the community. She and her husband Garth had been away at their Palm Springs estate for much of last week and must have missed the new people moving in. Since the Bartons returned to town, Prissy sometimes noticed the movement of a silhouette behind the always-drawn shades in the mansion next door, but she'd never seen anyone come in or out. It was difficult to keep track these days anyway, since so many of her neighbors in this wealthy beach-adjacent stretch of town spent large chunks of the summer traveling. It was hard to know who was on vacation, much less who had rented or lent out their home. Prissy knew that the owners of the house next door were a Hollywood agent and his wife, who ran some kind of scholarship fund for underprivileged youth, but they weren't especially friendly and were gone for long stretches of the year. In fact, she'd overheard another neighbor say they'd be gone until August. Since she hadn't seen them in weeks, it made sense that the person she'd seen was a renter. As Prissy approached the front door, she felt a tingle of anticipation. What if the agent had lent out his house to a client, maybe a famous celebrity? It wouldn't be unusual. Lots of famous people lived or vacationed here. She could often spot them because they wore baseball caps, sunglasses, and ratty clothes. It was like their uniform. Plus, they rarely looked up. If she saw someone who looked borderline homeless, hiding their face and refusing to make eye contact, there was a solid chance it was a celebrity. Of course, she'd learned the hard way that sometimes it was a homeless person, so she was more cautious about approaching them than when she'd first moved in. It wasn't like Prissy was a stranger to wealth. For the last 9 years, she'd been married to Garth Barton, who was an extremely successful executive with Sharp Kimsey, an international oil and gas company. Until last year, they'd lived in the historic Hancock Park neighborhood, not far from all those gleaming downtown Los Angeles skyscrapers. But Prissy, who had grown up poor and sweaty in Catahoula, Louisiana, had grown tired of the sweltering summer heat of central L.A. and demanded they move to the beach, which was usually 50.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?